Chapter 38. Thank you for the warm welcome. This is a very lovely home you have here, by the way, Jacob said, his hands folded behind his back as he surveyed the bookcase with obvious curiosity. There were several books I recognized: Brave New World, 1984 by George Orwell, and Slaughterhouse-Five, along with a variety of other, more esoteric titles that I didn't. The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, Helter Skelter, and a complete copy of the Pentagon Papers. Ed snorted and rolled his eyes. You Germans always were polite ones, but there's no need to sugarcoat things. You can just say it's a Shithal, I won't be offended. He paused. Still, I'd rather have a Shithal bunker out in the middle of a cornfield than a cookie-cutter flesh house over in Sunnyside proper. Did you build this place yourself? I asked. This guy had Doomsday Prepper written all over him, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if the answer was yes. No, I found it a bunch of years back, Ed replied casually. This place is a vestigial remnant from before the hole consolidated its grip on this floor. Or at least in this quadrant, he amended. I've been here for, he paused and silently counted on his fingers, 40 years, I think? Maybe longer than that. But a long time, is the point. I know clipped sometime in the late 70s. After the war. Back in those days, this was floor 19, not 24. Everything was different then. Ed lowered his foot with a wince, then reached into his coat and pulled out colorful glass bung as long as my arm. He packed something pungent into the bowl, then promptly set it ablaze with a small trickle of mana. Sorry, Ed apologized, before taking a huge, burbling rip on the other end. Like I said, bad arthritis. This helps with the pain. And the PTSD, he added, almost as an afterthought. I don't give a shit what you do in your own house, I offered with a shrug, but I'd love to circle back around to that other thing you said. The part about my arthritis? He asked. What? No, I grumbled. Not the arthritis. As shocking as you might find this, I also do not give a shit about your arthritis. I meant the part where you casually mentioned that this used to be floor 19. That seems sort of important with broad and potentially horrifying implications. I was operating under the assumption that there are 1,000 floors. Period. End of story. Yeah, that's the corpo narrative. Ed squinted, then blew out a cloud of smoke. It's what everyone wants you believe. Sure, maybe there really are 1,000 floors. I've talked to some of the old-timers who say there have always been and will always be only 1,000 floors. He leaned forward, tapping the table for emphasis. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But one thing I know, certain as sin, is that this place grows. About a floor per decade, give or take a few years. Which means that if there really are only 1,000 floors, some of them must merge. Or maybe they atrophy and die off, like a crab shedding its exoskeleton. He shrugged, the motion almost dismissive. Or maybe that's bullshit too, and there's actually 2,000 floors. Or 3. Or 10. Or maybe the floors rotate just like the quadrants do. The point is, anyone who tells you they've got this place figured out is full of horseshit. The backrooms don't play by any rules you or I understand. Jacob immediately fished out a notebook from his coat pocket and started scribbling furiously at a blank page. Fascinating, he muttered under his breath. I've heard both prevailing theories, but it's always been from a second or third-hand account. Never from a first-hand source. You're saying that you, personally, have been on this floor since it was floor 19? That's exactly what I'm saying, Haas, Ed nodded in confirmation. And it's not just that, either. I've had decades to see how much this floor's changed since I first got here. A lot of delvers think these floors are static, unchanging. They are wrong. Floors get updated, and that's why I think there's some merit to this whole floors merging theory. If you'd seen this place back in the 70s, you wouldn't even recognize it. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, a faraway look creeping into his eyes. Thematically, it was similar, I guess, one giant, endless neighborhood. But it wasn't modern. Not like it is now, he said. It was like a Leave It to Beaver fever dream. Just try to imagine a distorted replica of 1950s Midwestern American town trapped in a goddamned snow globe. Reminded me of one of those government installation towns the CIA used to build out in Nevada to test nukes on. Ed reached for his bong and took a deep rip before continuing. Except back then, everything was in black and white, he added. The people. The houses. The grass, the trees, the sky. Grayscale. All of it. Everything but the delvers who passed through. We were all in brilliant, high-def LSD Technicolor. Unless you stayed here too long. Then you started to lose your color, too. But that was a small price to pay for safety. Once upon a time, this floor was one of the largest safe harbors you could find between the VFW reception hall on floor 0 and floor 100. People stayed here. Lived here. It was different then. Simpler. Safer. Wait, what? The VFW reception hall? I repeated, quirking an eyebrow. Do you mean the lobby? Is that what floor 0 is now? Ed asked, sounding tired. He took another rip on his bong, then pressed his eyes shut and rubbed at one temple. Christ, I've been out of the loop too long. He exhaled another long plume of smoke. It's been 8 or 9 years since the last time I bumped into anyone else. At least, I think it's been 8 or 9 years. Time's wonky here. Doesn't matter, he said, waving a hand through the air. Point is, this place changes. He paused, leaning back in his wobbly chair. The backrooms, I mean, he clarified. Back when floor 0 was the VFW reception hall, not this lobby nonsense, this floor was a safe harbor. Being stuck in black and white was annoying, but you got used to it. And for a lot of delvers who gave up on the idea of going home, this level was the closest we ever got to reclaiming some sense of normalcy. Nice homes. Lots of open space with trees and grass. You can even look up at the sky. And there were no dwellers here? Jacob asked, still scribbling in his journal. A few, Ed admitted, taking another hit before setting the bong aside. Mimics, mostly. Weird ones, though. Instead of pretending to be furniture, they pretended to be people. He glanced at Croc, who no longer looked like a blue parrot and instead resembled a blue rubber dog. They were like your friend there. Which is to say, very shitty at disguising themselves. You could spot him a mile off, and as long as you didn't get too close, they minded their own damn business. Pretty good neighbors, all things considered. Not like the nightmares we've got now. What the hell happened? I asked, genuinely curious. Seriously, how in the hell did this place go from a grayscale 1950s TV town to this suburban hellscape? Best I can guess, Ed said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. The closer a level is to the surface, the more malleable it is. It's like the upper floors are softer clay, easier to mold and reshape. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. I could never prove it for a fact, but I think a big part of the change had to do with this covert government black op, Project Black Marriage. The feds were always poking their noses where they didn't belong, and we're all paying for it. I stole another look at the bookshelf and my gaze lingered on the bound copy of the Pentagon Papers. Yep, definitely a conspiracy theory nut job. Now before you call for the men in the white coats, he said, lifting one hand to forestall any interruptions, just hear me out. Any of you happen to know what's on the level below us? Down on floor 25? It's a VRD laboratory, Jacob answered matter-of-factly. That's goddamned right it is, Ed replied. He eyeballed Jacob, clearly connecting a few of the dots. Should have guessed you'd know about the labs, being a transmog and all. But it isn't just helix splicers they've got down there, you know. There's all kinds of VRD tech. Stuff that no one understands. Biological containment units, armories stocked like they're prepping for World War III, RMD facilities with advanced technology that could reshape the world. And if you think the spooks at the CIA don't know about this place, you're higher than I am. Trust me, they're all over it. Hell, I'd bet my right arm that half of the tech DARPA is tinkering with is shit they managed to salvage from the backrooms. No different than what MJ-12 did with all the alien tech they recovered from the crash at Roswell, It's just another layer of the same playbook. Ed's expression visibly darkened and his tone grew cold. Ran into some of their agents about 20 years back. They called themselves BEACON, Bureau of Extradimensional Anomalies and Covert Opposition Neutralization. Bureaucratic pricks. The bastards tried to recruit me, if you can believe it. I could not, in fact, believe it or half the other bullshit that was coming out of this guy's mouth, but I held my tongue. Yep, they wanted me on the team, Ed continued, on account of my distinguished military service during NAM. He rolled his eyes. Not that I was interested, you understand. Told them to go sit on a 105 round and spin. But I kept my ear to the ground, white no. And that's how I heard about Project Black Marriage. The feds were particularly interested in a piece of VRD tech called the Nexus Pulse. What exactly does the Nexus Pulse do, you ask? He smirked and held up a hand to forestall any potential answers. The Nexus Pulse, he continued, is an enormous goddamned radio transmitter capable of reprogramming all sapient minds within a certain radius. This thing could rewrite memories, eradicate personal identity, implant subconsciousness suggestions, and pacify entire population groups. He took another bong rip. Imagine if the government could turn every citizen in an enemy nation-state into a violent sleeper agent? Or settle civil unrest with the push of a button. Scary as hell, right? And you think they were experimenting on the residents of the safe harbor using this Nexus Pulse thing? I asked. You're damn skippy, that's what I think, Ed shot back, his voice rising, a vein pulsing angrily in his forehead. And it's what I think is at the heart of the radio station, the Nexus Pulse. The signal started changing people, but not just them. It started changing the dwellers, too. The mimics. The ones pretending to be human. He cackled. Those Fedshith heads with Beacon didn't count on that, though. They thought they were so smart, so in control. But they weren't. And I'm betting they sure as hell didn't count on the Blight, either. He leaned forward, as though imparting some great secret. Now, this is pure speculation, mind you, but I think the Blight might also have some sort of rudimentary intelligence. It's not just a disease or a phenomenon. I'm telling you, it thinks. The Blight started infecting the residents, right? But then the signal, the Nexus Pulse, it started infecting the Blight. Twisting it. Shaping it. And this? The Hoa. It's the result. A merger of man, monster, and machine, all controlled by a technology that was supposed to make things better. Instead, it made everything 1,000 times worse. A heavy silence settled over the room as we considered the implications of Ed's words. That sounds utterly mad, Temperance said, folding her arms and fixing Ed with a skeptical glare. I'm just going to say it. You sound mentally unwell. I have been in the back rooms longer than any of you, and I can assure you, this world predates your current government by hundreds, or perhaps, even thousands of years. Furthermore, I've never heard of any of these so-called clandestine organizations and, frankly, your theory reeks of paranoia and the effects of prolonged isolation. Now, Kleiner Hayes, Jacob chided, patting her on the arm, it's no crazier than believing the backrooms are a divine test, designed by an alien god to separate the wheat from the chaff. I agreed with Jacob. Although Ed was clearly paranoid, his theory didn't seem entirely outside the realm of possibility. I had no doubt that the backrooms could theoretically produce an artifact like the Nexus Pulse, and if something like that did exist, I was equally sure the CIA would be interested in getting a hold of it. And considering the CIA's checkered history and shady operating practices, would they really be above testing a powerful mind control weapon on people trapped in an extra-dimensional prison? Probably not. That still didn't mean Ed was right, but maybe he wasn't wrong either. In the end, though, the truth didn't really matter. Not to me. Temp was as crazy as a bag full of caffeinated raccoons, but I still trusted her. Sure, maybe Ed was a few fries short of a happy meal, but everyone in the backrooms was fundamentally damaged in one way or another. Jacob was a pacifist in a Mad Max murder world, Croc was flesh-eating mimic who couldn't properly mimic things, and Temperance was a homicidal pilgrim in a skin-tight bunny suit. There were no perfect people in the backrooms. No normal people, either. Only the crazy ones survived here. Right now, there were only two things that really mattered. 1. Could Ed be trusted not to turn us into human-based meat chill the second he had an opportunity, and 2. Could he help us get past the wall of Kyles and Karens surrounding the exit kiosk? I wasn't sure about the second question, but he had plenty of opportunities to screw us over and leave us for dead, and he'd chosen to help us instead. As far as I was concerned, he'd earned enough goodwill for me to lend him the benefit of the doubt. "Don't mind Temperance," I said to Ed. "She has very strong opinions and doesn't play especially well with others." "I'm sure she wasn't trying to insult you." "Oh no, I was indeed insulting him," Temp clarified. "Thanks, Temp," I muttered. "As always, your diplomatic abilities continue to shock and amazing me." Ed chuckled, a low, raspy sound that carried more amusement than warmth. "At least she's honest," he said. "For what it's worth, it'll take a lot more than that to insult me. People have been calling me crazy for decades, Kemo-sab. But here's the thing. I was right about Agent Orange. About Operation Chaos. About the Pentagon Papers and the Tuskegee experiments. I was right every damn time. You'll see. Time is on my side. It always is. Besides, it doesn't matter if you believe me. If you want to get out of here, you need me." He offered us a wide grin that made him look more deranged than ever. "Because I can take down the signal. Like you did back at the cookout?" I asked, feeling an ember of hope ignite in my chest. "With the radio?" "Just like that," he said, nodding vigorously, "but everywhere all at once." He paused, seeming to appraise us carefully. "Come on," he finally said, "let me show you something." The chair squeaked as he pushed himself to his feet, then lumbered over toward the steel glass door at the far end of the room. He paused by the birdcage and coaxed the parrot out onto his hand with a few soothing words. "Who's a pretty bird?" Ed said, booping the parrot on the beak with one finger. "Kill you with fire," she replied, inching her way onto his shoulder. "That's my girl," Ed mumbled, before returning to the blast door. He disengaged the locks, pulled the hatch open with the shriek of rusty hinges, then ushered us into the connecting room, which was far better furnished than his living quarters. Tables lined every wall, all of them loaded down with various electrical equipment. Spools of wire and buckets of gutted radio parts, along with heaps of transistors and capacitors, diodes and electrical relay switches, fuses and transformers galore. The guy had enough batteries to fill a bathtub. He also had scads of tools, and although I wasn't an electrician by trade, I'd installed enough lights and changed enough wall outlets to be familiar with most of them. Decorating one wall was an enormous map with colored twine running from everywhere to everywhere else in a chaotic sprawl. It looked like one of those true crime corkboards, and it definitely didn't make it seem any less crazy. Bits of red twine all lead to one central location, neatly labeled as WBSC. Sunnyside Community Radio Broadcast Station. As impressively insane as the board was, however, the true PSD resistance was the enormous device occupying the center of the room, 2 parts radio, 1 part bomb, and easily the size of a car engine. "This here is Big Bertha," he said, affectionately patting the side of the enormous bomb radio disruptor. "I've been working on her for years and she's finally ready to go. Once I fire up Bertha, the signal will go down all across Sunnyside. It's basically a giant magical EMP that'll fry the Nexus for good." He snapped his fingers with a loud crack. Boom. Just like that. Once the signal fails, all the Sunny-sitters will be mindless husks just like they were at the party after I set off the smaller disruptor. Except this time, it'll be permanent. "What about the elites?" I asked. "Like the Kyles and the Karens who were standing guard outside that fireworks tent?" Ed asked. "Yeah, like those," I replied evenly. "Those things are tough. Taking down the signal at the source is the only way you're getting past them," Ed said. "And this device can do all of that?" Jacob asked, crouching down to examine the machine in closer detail. "If that's the case, then why haven't you used it yet, I wonder?" Ed grimaced, then rubbed the back of his neck. "See, that's the only catch. Big Bertha can crash the signal, but it needs to be near the source. Within 50 feet or so of the Nexus pulse. He headed over to the map and pointed at the radio station. The WBSC community broadcast station, he growled. That's where the Nexus pulse is. I'm sure of it. Those weird radio announcements you've been hearing? That's all part of the signal. Big Brother, always keeping their eyes and ears on you. Getting into the radio station itself is the rub, and I can't do it alone. He lifted one hand, palm up, and conjured a miniature replica of a two-story building of reinforced concrete with a large steel broadcasting antenna protruding from its flat roof. The letters WBSC ran boldly across the front of the building, which reminded me more of a prison than it did of a radio broadcasting station. Encircling the perimeter of the building were Sunny Sitters. An army of elite Kyles and Karens, even more dangerous than their counterparts. Wow, that's amazing, Croc marveled. How do you do that? Make the picture, I mean? Illusion magic, Ed replied tersely. It's sort of my specialty. This, he gestured toward the slowly rotating illusion with his free hand, is the broadcast station. As you can plainly see, the outside is crawling with hostile Sunny Sitters. There's no way to get past them, and even if we could, which you can't, the building itself is built like a goddamn siege fortress. Great sales pitch, I said, folding my arms across my chest. Really filling me with overwhelming confidence. Oh, ye have little faith, he replied. Getting past the elites might not be possible, but I've found another way in. He snapped his fingers, and the illusion zoomed out, revealing a maze of interconnecting underground passageways. There are a series of fallout tunnels that still run beneath the city, vestigial structures, just like my bunker. Those structures aren't a part of the HOA, so the Sunny Sitters avoid them like the plague, and one of those tunnels just so happens to connect to the station's sub-basement. The only wrinkle is that to get to the tunnel you have to go through here. Another tiny building shimmered into existence, this one labeled Sunnyside Tiny Talks Preschool. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, I said, holding up a hand to stop him. Is this a joke? You're telling me that you need help getting through a preschool? Maybe I'm missing something here, but surely a bunch of little kids can't be that tough, right? Hell, why can't you just take one of those radio disruptors with you and use it on all the crotch goblins inside? Quick and easy. Ed's face had grown pale and his expression dark. The horrors inside that preschool are worse than you could possibly imagine, he said, finally banishing the conjured illusion. I saw a F4 phantom drench an entire town of non-combatants outside of Khe-San with napalm, and that still wasn't as bad as what's inside that godforsaken preschool. Plus, the disruptors don't work on the kids, because the signal doesn't work on the kids. The Sunny Sitters, they reproduce like mimics, Ed explained. They hatch in clutches and the preschools serve as breeding grounds. The toddlers are small and relatively weak, but extremely violent and unpredictable. Once they get old enough, they evolve into Timmies and Tammies before being released into the cornfields, where they are slowly infected by the signal and the squirrel feed, until eventually they evolve again into their adult form. I've tried to get through the preschool a dozen times, at least, he continued. I've also almost died a dozen times, too. There are just too many of those goddamn demon babies. If we all went together, though, he nodded, we could do it. Get past the toddlers and into the basement of the broadcast station. From there, I activate Big Bertha, we take down the signal, and everything topsy turns into anarchy. While the Sunny Sitters are busy murdering each other, I can finally get away from this floor. I felt a brief pang of guilt. From the sounds of it, all Ed wanted was to leave this place in his rearview mirror. Thing was, I could help him do that right now. I could use a doorway anchor to open a gateway to my shop and he could be free with 2 steps. Except, I couldn't do that because we needed him. Assuming Ed was right, taking down the radio station would incapacitate the Sunny Sitters guarding the exit kiosk, which, in turn, would allow us to get 1 step closer to the franchisor. If I let him go now, there was no telling how long we might be stuck here. So, even though it made me feel like a real bastard, I kept my mouth shut about the doorway anchor. Well, what the hell are we waiting for? I said instead. Ed nodded. My thoughts exactly, and the timing couldn't be better. He glanced down at his watch. "What's the rush?" I asked, suddenly feeling a creeping sense of dread. "It's just a few hours until daybreak," Ed replied. Like all the kids in this fucked-up town, the toddlers are significantly weaker during the daylight hours. Once the moon goes up, it's a whole different ball game. They get stronger, faster, meaner. Even gain temporary levels. And starting tomorrow night, it's going to be worse. Way worse. Exponentially worse. "What happens tomorrow night?" I asked, knowing full well I wasn't going to like the answer. "The bleeding moon," Ed replied. "Happens once every few years and lasts for about a month or so. Sometimes even 2. The sun doesn't come up. The moon starts to bleed. The kids, they start to evolve, turn into rabid, demon werewolves. But with horns. Instead of gaining 10 levels, they gain 15, and they get real hungry. Trust me, it's a whole thing. If we don't move now, y'all could be stuck here for a good long while. If I wasn't sold before, I was now. Sounds like we need to go kick the shit out of some eldritch toddlers." "Couldn't have said it better myself," Ed agreed. Chapter 39. Even though we were working against a shot clock, Ed had some additional preparations to make before we could depart, which was good because we needed to catch a few hours of shut-eye. I was more than ready to leave this nightmare floor behind and never look back, but everyone was exhausted, especially after the adrenaline from our cookout battle faded. We headed back into Ed's living quarters and passed out on the floor, though Jacob stayed up to keep watch. When I offered to split the watch, Jacob just shrugged it off and said it was nothing. Sendrils are far more physically resilient than humans. We need much less sleep and recover more quickly, as well. Then he pulled a test tube vial from storage. "I also have a few of these lying around. Ein gut Nachtruhe, I call it. A good night's rest in a tube." He uncorked the stopper and chugged the liquid with a scowl. The formula could still use a little work. It functions well but tastes like burning rubber. Croc also assured me that it could help Jacob keep an eye on things, though I found it a little disconcerting since the dog tended to literally watch me sleep whenever it got the chance. I just pushed all of those uncomfortable thoughts to the back of my head, curled up on my side, and passed out in less than a few minutes. I considered that one of my unique superpowers, a gift imparted to me during my time in the Marine Corps. I could fall asleep on command, and I could do it anywhere, no matter the circumstances, and no matter how physically uncomfortable I was. I'd slept in ditches, on the top of tank treads, and suspended from a cargo strap in a gunner turret. In a war zone, you never knew when you were going to get the chance to sleep again, so you grabbed every opportunity that came your way. The back rooms were the same. I didn't dream, which was a mercy. I was certain that Golf Cart Centaur would be waiting for me behind my eyelids, but instead it was just a field of blissful black. Jacob shook me awake a few hours later, and though I was still groggy, I no longer felt like a microwave dog turd. I took a few minutes to freshen up in Ed's cramped bathroom, splashing some water across my face, then brushed my teeth, scrubbing the taste of fetid cat ass from my mouth. We ate a small meal of all beef franks, still piping hot, and chased it down with off-brand energy drinks filled with so much caffeine they made one of my eyes twitch. Night Revolt, plug into the chaos. It tasted like regret, charbroiled Skittles, and type 2 diabetes, but holy shit did it get the job done. Then we were off. Ed loaded Big Bertha into his personal storage space, which was supremely convenient for travel, given how large the device was, though I suspected it also served a secondary purpose. If he died, anything inside his subspace storage system would be gone. Lost forever and eventually reclaimed and recirculated by the backrooms. Sure, we could loot his corpse and take any of the relics stored in his spatial core, but we'd never see Big Bertha again. Which meant, we needed to make sure Ed survived, because without him we'd be trapped here indefinitely. I was pretty sure that's just the way he wanted it. It was a smart move, pragmatic, and exactly the kind of thing I would have done if I was in his shoes. It was daylight by the time we left the bunker, and the Kevins and Kathys had all retreated indoors for the time being. Ed assured us that they'd stay away until sunset and leave us be, so long as we didn't attempt to enter any of the houses. I asked about the Kyles and Karens, guarding the fireworks kiosk, but Ed just grimaced and shook his head no. The elites are a different breed. Stronger. Faster. Deadlier. They don't ever seem to sleep and the kids know not to fuck around with them. Speaking of the youth of Sunnyside, the cornfields were now empty and harmless, since the cannibal kids had returned to the streets of suburbia where they roamed about on their bikes. We caught sight of various gangs once or twice, but mostly they kept their distance, doing whatever it was that monster children did during the daylight hours. We walked for several hours, Ed leading the way without the use of his dowsing rods. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, turning left and right down various streets, cutting through fenced backyards, all while carefully skirting around the occasional neighborhood playground. There were quite a few of those, and they seemed to serve as communal watering holes for the various child biker gangs. The kids would watch us with cold, unnerving eyes and perpetually flat expressions, but never made any attempt to pursue us. It was almost like they didn't quite know what to do with us. Obviously, we were adults, although at 5'0", Temp probably could have passed as a teenager, but we were outside during daylight hours, which meant we weren't Kevins or Kathys. Ergo, we didn't fit into the natural order of things, and so they let us be. Eventually, we found ourselves in front of the Sunnyside Tiny Talks preschool. It was a neat, two-story building with a tidy brick facade, framed in by neatly manicured bushes, which seamlessly blended into the cookie-cutter suburban surroundings. It didn't look particularly ominous from the outside, and under any other circumstances, I wouldn't have given the place a second look. The longer I stared, though, the more I realized something was subtly off. The fenced-in playground was fastidiously clean, the swings still gently swaying as if recently abandoned, except there was no one to be seen. All of the other playgrounds had been occupied by kids, but not this one. Almost as though the older children were avoiding it the same way the parents avoided the cornfields. Bright slides and jungle gyms waited for the carefree giggle of a happy kid, but none came. The lights inside were all off, and through the darkened windows, the empty classrooms felt frozen in time. I didn't see anyone. No teachers or administrators. No janitors or maintenance workers. No chatter, no footsteps, no distant hum of activity. Just the deep unsettling silence of a mausoleum, almost as if the entire place was holding its breath in anticipation. Waiting for something. Waiting for us, maybe. "I don't like this at all, Dan," Croc said, shuffling nervously from paw to paw. "I know we need to do this, but it feels like a very bad idea. Remember when I said we shouldn't fight Funtime Frank, and then we did anyway, because no one listens to me, and everyone almost died?" "That does ring a certain bell," I said, nodding. "Yeah, well, this is like that. There's something bad inside that place. Something even worse than the Kevins and Kathys at the party or that weird monster in the cornfield." The dog dropped its voice low, so only I could hear it. "This place is a mimic hatchery, Dan. As a mimic myself, I can intuitively sense it. And here." The dog thumped its chest with one paw. "That makes sense, I suppose," I replied with a shrug. Ed mentioned that the original inhabitants on this floor were humanoid mimics. "You don't understand, Dan," Croc insisted, sounding close to panic. "You don't ever go into a mimic hatchery. It's the golden rule of delving. One time I was with this delver named Mariah, and she insisted we cut through a hatchery, even though I warned her not to." "Let me guess," I said, "Mariah went on to live a full and happy life in one of the safe harbors?" "Of course not, Dan," Croc replied, flabbergasted. "I could have fit what was left of her in a postage envelope. Even we mimics don't go inside an active hatchery. I cannot stress enough just how violent juvenile mimics are. They have no self-control whatsoever and have a singular desire to feed. Most mimics die without ever leaving the hatchery because they are murdered by other juvenile mimics." "Holy shit, newborn Thunderdome," I said. "That's intense. Super fucked up." "Yes, very messed up indeed," Croc agreed, nodding, "but they will also kill anything stupid enough to blunder into their lair. There's liable to be hundreds, maybe even thousands, of mimics spawn in there, Dan. If we go in, it's going to be a bloodbath. And if we don't, I said, we're never going to make it down to the next floor. I patted Croc on its snout. Don't worry, bud, we'll be okay. Just promise me that if things go wrong, we'll run away? Please? Croc asked earnestly. Because I'm telling you, Dan, a mimic hatchery is the one place no delver in their right mind should ever go. Not unless they have a death wish. Promise, I said seriously and meant it. If things get too dicey, we'll bail. Pinky swear. We can always come back with extra reinforcements if we need to. All right, gather on me, Ed called, waving everyone over to his position, not far from the front doors. There's a couple of things we need to take care of before we can go in. He reached into his coat and once more pulled out the impossibly long bung. First things first, y'all are going to need to get high. He loaded something into the bowl and used his thumb to summon a dash of fire. Thank you, but no, Jacob said, politely refusing. I would prefer not to. Despite my background as a chemist, I've never been one for recreational drug use, other than beer, of course. As we Germans say, Hopfen und Malz, Gott erhalts. Should all else fail, may God preserve hops and malt. Sorry, Haas, but this isn't optional, Ed replied. This stuff isn't of the purely recreational variety, if you catch my drift. It'll help dispel all the illusions for a while. Open your third eye and let you see through the spurified social filter. I'm betting you've never had to kill a toddler before, but I haven't, trust me, it's the sort of thing that sticks with you. Without this, he tapped the side of the bong, that's what you'll see. A bunch of little sweet, chubby-cheeked babies and toddlers all trying to gut you like a luau pig. A lot of delvers can't bring themselves to do what needs doing, even while these little monsters eat them alive. Seeing them in their true form helps. Once you get a glimpse beneath the veil, you won't have any problem setting these little shits on fire. You're also going to need these. He pulled out several Vietnam-era gas masks, which had all seen better days. The buff from the high usually only lasts an hour or so, but these'll prolong its effects. Part of the reason the illusion magic is so powerful here is because it's not entirely mental. There's a physiological component too. The spores, Jacob said, nodding in agreement. You got it, Haas, Ed replied. All of the adult sunny sitters are carriers. Those boils all over their necks? When they pop, they release a cloud of airborne spores that pass through the nose and mouth and eventually get into your bloodstream. The resistance you get from grit helps some, keeps you from going under too quickly. But what you really need is a sky-high preservation score. Without both, the social filter will still worm its way into your head. The gas masks will help with that. Now who wants to go first? He asked, thrusting the bong toward us. Although I hadn't smoked weed since well before my Marine Corps days, I'd be lying if I said this was my first time. There wasn't a lot for teenagers to do in rural Ohio, so alcohol and drugs were always at the top of the list along with cow tipping, dirt biking, the occasional cliff diving, and, of course, bottle rocket wars. Just the bullshit that every Midwestern kid gets up to while they're waiting to get the hell out of Dodge and go someplace better. For a kid from Ohio, even a war zone 6,000 miles away was someplace better. I'll take this one for the team, I said, snatching the bong. Even though it had been years, I'd spent plenty of afternoons in Tyler Edenson's basement, smoking shitty weed while his dad worked late at the Feathergold poultry processing plant, and the muscle memory was still there. Just like riding a bike. I took a deep long rip, and felt the pungent smoke fill my mouth and lungs. A notice appeared in the haze of smoke as I exhaled. You've transcended beyond the realm of stoner's insight and reached the next level of cosmic understanding. Or, you're just really, really high. Either way, reality's never looked clearer. While under this buff, you gain a 20% boost to perception, grit, and evasion for a full hour. Enjoy the ride, spaceman. Despite the message, I didn't feel high at all. Just the opposite. My head felt less fuzzy and everything around me seemed to snap into sharp, high-def clarity. The illusionary facade laying lightly over the tiny Tots preschool disappeared, replaced by a fleshy edifice of bone and meat and sinew. The entire building looked like an oozing sore, and now I could see dark shapes scuttling around behind the frosted windows. That wasn't the only illusion it dispelled, though. I stumbled away from it with the bong still clutched in one hand and instinctively yanked my hammer out with my other, brandishing it like a cross as I fed mana into the weapon. It ignited with blue light and swelled to the size of a medieval bat'lix. "What the fuck, man?" I yelled at Ed. "You're one of them." It seemed like a perfectly reasonable response since normal human Ed was gone and a nightmare version of him, complete with hair tentacles, 6 eyes, and a circular lamprey mouth was now standing in his place. Sorry about that, Kimoseb," Ed said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Didn't think I needed to give you a heads up. Most folks don't have the grip to see through my mutable persona illusion, not even after a hit off the cosmic grip. That's the bong, by the way. The cosmic grip." He paused and squinted at me with all 6 of his weird eyes. "You must have a ludicrously high base grit stat. Like, off the charts kind of high." "What's wrong?" Temp and Jacob both asked, almost in tandem. They couldn't see what I did. Couldn't see Ed for what he really was. "This chucklefuck is a sunny sitter," I growled, though I never took my eyes off Ed. "Now answer the question, dickhole, before I set your blood on fire." My knuckles were white from gripping the hammer so tightly. "What the fuck are you?" "A delver," Ed replied slowly, his tone low and deliberate as though he was talking to a spooked animal. "But also, a prime example of what happens when you stick around here too long," he admitted with a lopsided shrug. "Not all of the sunny sitters are former delvers, but some of them are. The kids. The Timmies and Tammies. They are all pure-blooded dwellers. Born and bred right here. They crawl out of hatcheries just like this one," he gestured toward the looming building with a glower, "and after a while, they evolve into Kevins and Kathys." Ed paused, his 6 eyes narrowing. "The big honchos, though? The HOA board members and the arcade bosses? They are all like us, or they were once, anyway. That's why the HOA is so keen to keep delvers here. To convert them. It's a long, ugly process, but when it works, a turned delver makes for a far stronger thrall than anything those spore-huffing freaks can crank out on their own. Me? I've been fighting the change for 30 years, kid. 30 goddamn years. But they got to me early. Got their filthy, spore-filled hooks buried deep in my brain before I knew what was happening. I'm still here, though. Mostly. For now. Holy shit, I said, licking my lips as I considered his words. That's awful. Once you get away from this level, will you go back to normal? Ed dropped his gaze, a shadow of resignation passing over his face as he shook his head. Afraid not, partner. This, he gestured vaguely to himself, his voice heavy with weariness, this is what I am now. Maybe there's some old tech buried on one of the research floors that could reverse the process. But let's be real, that's a damn pipe dream at this point. That's why I keep the mutable persona relic equipped. It lets me look normal. Most of the time, anyway. But it's just a mask, hiding the mess underneath. He paused, his gaze dropping. It's a convenient lie. Nothing more. The words were gut punch, and I felt genuinely terrible for him, but that didn't ease my worries any. Ed was like the guy in the zombie movie who got bit, and then tried to cover it up. He was dangerous, and at some point, it was possible he'd turn on us. Are you contagious? I asked sharply. Like the others, I mean? No, he said. See for yourself. He tilted his chin up and slowly turned his head from side to side, giving me a clearer view. No spore sacks. I'm not contagious, won't be spreading this nightmare to anyone else. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. But there's one slight, little hiccup that I should probably bring up since we're having a moment of transparency here, he added, his tone suddenly guarded, as if weighing just how much to say. Honesty is the best policy, Croc replied sagely. Like Dan always says, friends don't lie to friends. Better to get it all out in the open here and now. Just like when Dan told me he had hemorrhoids. I don't have hemorrhoids, I muttered, though the mimic's words bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Again, not because I had hemorrhoids, but because I was actively concealing some very important things from Ed. Well, see, the thing is, Ed said, I need to feed off regular delvers. Just a little. Like some sort of vampire. Croc asked, its tail wagging excitedly. Yes and no, Ed said, his voice tight, almost reluctant, though I don't drink blood, if that's what you're thinking. He hesitated, his mouth working like he was chewing on the words before finally spitting them out. I eat memories, he finally finished. He let the weight of the statement hang in the air for a beat, then tapped his temple with one callous finger. Because that's what this place takes from you, he continued, his tone bitter and angry. It gets inside your head and starts eating away at your personality, at your memories, at who you are until, eventually, you're an empty husk and there's nothing left. Once the transformation starts, the only way to hold on to what's left of you, your memories, your identity, is to take little pieces from someone else. It's survival, but it ain't pretty. Not by a long shot. Does that mean you've eaten from us? Temperance hissed, her cleaver flying into her hand in anticipation of impending violence. Yeah, because that would be bad, Croc added. On top of not lying to each other, friends also don't kill, eat, or dismember each other. Emphasis on the eating part, which is something I've personally struggled with. Like this one time, I was helping this delver named Connor who lost a foot to an invisible bear trap on the 4th floor, and then I ate the foot because it was just lying there doing no one any good at all. But it turns out Connor was very attached to the foot and unhappy that I'd eaten it, which ended up emotionally scarring him for the rest of his life, which wasn't very long, on account of all the blood loss. What? God, no, Ed said, his voice sharp with disgust. Though it was hard to tell whether he was more repulsed by Croc's story or the accusation itself. That would be monstrous. I'd never feed on a friend. Even I have my limits. He sighed, readjusting his baseball cap. I only take from people who are already lost causes, or, like no, corpses. Memories linger for a while after someone dies. A few weeks, give or take. Sure, they degrade over time, but I don't need much to get by. Just enough to keep myself together. He paused, his gaze shifting toward the shadows as if calculating some unseen risk. If it comes down to it, I can even scrape by on dwellers. They are not great, but it's better than starving. You gotta understand, it's not about the morality of it anymore, it's about survival. His 6 eyes fixed on me, unblinking. And I intend to survive. Ed's answer didn't make me feel good, but it did make me feel minutely better. That's something, at least, I said. Sorry, just to circle back around to the whole vampire thing, Croc said, because it sounds to me like you were definitely 100% a vampire, right? Yeah, Ed said after thinking about it for a moment. I guess in the most technical sense of the word I am a vampire. But not a blood-sucking, crosses and garlic vampire. Why does that matter? Temperance asked, still gripping her cleaver. Why does that matter? Croc scoffed. Am I the only one who sees what this means? We've found a man, named Edward, who is a little vampire with a tragic backstory. It's happening, guys. I can't believe it's really happening. Don't you see, Dan? Croc said, turning its goggly eyes on me. It's fate. Clearly, he was meant to be part of our crew. We already have a Jacob, who's a transmog, which is basically a werewolf if you think about it, and now we have a vampiric Edward. We're doing it, guys. We're building the cast of Twilight. This is just... wow. I'm at a loss for words. I'm sorry, what's this now? Twilight? Ed asked, glancing between me and Croc, confusion evident on his inhuman face. Is this some kind of cryptic prophecy thing or some sort of covert government operation? What am I missing here? It's from a book series, Croc said, practically bouncing up and down on its paws, called Twilight, written by the eminently talented, internationally best-selling author Stephanie Meyer. You really don't have to include that she's an internationally best-selling author every single time, Temperance said, finally sheathing her cleaver. Croc didn't seem to hear her. That or the mimic simply didn't care. Twilight. Never heard of it, Ed said with a shrug. You will now, I warned, before falling silent as I regarded the delver. This changes things, I said, suddenly serious. You know that, right? Ed nodding, looking grim. I'm not going to hold this, I waved a hand at. Just all of him, against you. I know exactly how fucked up the backrooms are, and I know what they do to people. This place tried to turn everyone into monsters of one kind or another. Sometimes it twisted people into moral abominations, like the aspirants who swore allegiance to the monarch, while other times it was a bit more literal. It never left people alone, though. Change was the only constant truism. But if I ever find out you've taken memories from me or my friends, I said, my voice cold and hard as the edge of a razor blade, I won't hesitate to put you down like a rabid dog. I offered him an unflinching gaze. We clear. Clear as clean glass, Ed said, offering me a nod. Good. I took a deep, calming breath, slid my hammer back into my tool belt and shoved the enormous glass pipe toward Temperance. Now the rest of you take a fat rip of this bong so we can go kill a bunch of demon babies. Our time is running out, I said as I slipped the gas mask into place. Chapter 40 is high as kites, and with our gas masks firmly in place, we kicked open the front doors of the preschool and went in hot with Temp and Jacob taking point. I gripped my hammer in one hand, ready to obliterate anything that got into fuck around and find out range, while spell cards and tools spun around me in a slow circle. Croc, Ed, and Woodstock brought up the rear, the bird perched on Ed's shoulder, its chest smoldering red and gold. After all the foreshadowing, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little excited to see the parrot kill something with fire. Stay away from the walls, Ed cautioned in a low whisper as we padded along the entryway hall, which led deeper into the preschool. They are covered with a sticky, acidic mucus substance. Of course they are, I muttered, trying to ignore the squelching sound of my own footfalls. Because this level is the gift that just keeps right on giving. Instead of linoleum or concrete, the floor was squishy, moist, and pale pink like the surface of a giant tongue. Everything inside the preschool was like that, though. An odd mixture of the mundane and the grotesquely organic. Fluorescent ceiling lights illuminated pale, fleshy walls, covered in unblinking eyes and random tufts of hair. White storage cubbies held craft supplies and kids' toys, right alongside bowls filled with fingers or noses. Worst of all were the oversized lamprey mouth holes that pockmarked the walls and ceilings. The circular orifices were about the size basketballs and ringed with rows and rows of barbed teeth. Keep an eye on those, Ed said as we passed a particularly dense cluster of mouth holes. He jerked his thumb toward them, his expression a mix of disgust and grim familiarity. They are internal tunnels, like those hamster tubes you see in pet stores, but, like no, for demon toddlers. I pulled up my mini-map as we walked and noted with no small amount of horror, that there were red triangular marks everywhere. It seemed that the building's exterior cloaked the inhabitants from the eyes of my map, but now that we were in the thick of things, the mask had been rudely ripped away. Each triangle indicated the presence of a hostile dweller, and there were so damn many of the marks that I couldn't even count them all. They squirmed and wriggled, overlapping with one another until the map was just a bright red blob. I still hadn't physically seen any of the toddler mimics, which meant they were probably tucked away in the tunnel system running through the walls and ceilings, but I'd never seen such a high concentration of dwellers in one place. We soon entered a circular receiving lobby with hallways branching off like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. A welcome banner danged from the ceiling, and directly beneath it was a reception desk that held a dated computer, a large directory map, and a wire rack filled with trifold brochures, all extolling the many virtues and benefits of the Sunnyside Tiny Talks preschool. I picked one up and flipped through the pages, grimacing at the god-awful pictures of smiling, fat-cheeked babies right alongside horrific images of butchered corpses. Welcome to Tiny Tots, the pamphlet proclaimed, where every day is a lesson in survival. Everyone knows children are the future, which is why we want only the strongest to survive. We believe that the weak are a burden on societal resources and must be culled, which is why we take a hands-off approach to learning, allowing the students to develop essential life skills by competing for dominance in a brutal, no-holds-barred murder arena. Thanks to our unique curriculum, focused on self-reliance, ambush tactics, and overwhelming violence, each of our tiny tots leave ready to face a world that is woefully unprepared for them. I flipped the page and scanned a list of bullet points with morbid curiosity. Why choose Tiny Tots Survival Preschool? Survival-based playtime, jungle gym or jungle? The line is blurred at Tiny Tots, where playground games build resilience and fighting spirit. Dynamic friendships, group work helps foster strong bonds and boundaries through teamwork and elimination. Ruthless rewards system, tots earn survival badges for outlasting those in their cohort, encouraging growth, responsibility, and conformity through natural selection. Flexible snack policy, if they can catch it, they can eat it. Our open feeding environment encourages creativity and stealth. On the back of the pamphlet was a list of quotes from satisfied customers, though based on those quotes, I wasn't sure if the writers actually understood what the words satisfied or customers actually meant. Oh my God, they are eating me alive. Please, for the love of God, kill me now. They are inside my torso. One review read, I'll never forget the smell of whatever they left behind in that playroom, said another. Oh Jesus, why do they have so many limbs? Is that how they move so fast? I slipped the pamphlet back onto the wire rack and shifted my attention to the glossy directory. Assuming the map was accurate, this place was an enormous maze of interconnected corridors and hallways, which was impossibly bigger than it appeared to be from the outside. The library, gymnasium, and cafeteria were all clearly marked out, but I ignored them and scanned the map until I found the maintenance staircase, which led to the sub-basement. According to Ed, that was where we'd find the vestigial tunnels that connected to the radio station. The only problem was that there was about a half-mile of twisting corridors between us and the stairwell. Ed slipped around the reception desk and confidently beelined toward a passageway that looked indistinguishable from the others. We followed it for 100 feet or so, before it ended at a T-juncture with one hallway heading off to the left and another snaking off to the right. That way leads to the cafeteria and the gym, Ed said, using the beam of a flashlight to point down the right-hand corridor. If we get separated for any reason, he said, try to get back to the reception lobby, but, whatever you do, don't go that way. Mr. Wiggles is in the cafeteria. Mr. Wiggles? I asked quietly. The preschool overseer, Ed clarified. He's a 1,000-legged eldritch worm, big as a school bus. Worse than those goddamn giant centipedes that used to crawl into my boots during NAM, and I hated those little bastards with a fiery passion you can't imagine. You see that thing, and you run. He scowled and shook his head. There's no fighting Mr. Wiggles. He's not just a monster, he's a force of nature. And you don't mess with nature. Bad monster. Kill you with fire, Woodstock confirmed, though this time it sounded like a warning and not a threat. The more time I spent with the bird, the more its ridiculous catchphrase started to feel oddly meaningful. It reminded me of a Pokémon, only able to say its own name, yet somehow everyone instinctively understood complex, nuanced conversations. With a sense of growing uneasy, we continued onward, moving away from the cafeteria and Mr. Wiggles, while simultaneously carving our way deeper into the preschool. It wasn't long before we started to hear the eerie giggle of children accompanied by the soft rustle of legs. Lots of legs. Too many legs. I could feel unseen eyes watching me from hidden shadows, and more than once, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. Whenever I turned to get a better look, though, there was never anything there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to drop down onto my back at any moment, so I took the liberty of summoning both Cynthia 2.0 and Drumbo to guard our collective asses. That earned a surprised look from Ed, followed by a begrudging nod of approval. Not bad, kid, Ed said, after thoroughly eyeballing my minions. You've got more surprises than a tie hooker, and I'm not just talking about the venereal diseases. I asked no follow-up questions after that statement, because there were some things that were better left as mysteries. The hallways were filled with eerily normal preschool classrooms. Low rectangular desks and plastic chairs, bookcases and toy bins, colorful kids' art decorating the walls. Except, all the art was subtly off, just like everything else about this place. One particularly memorable scene depicted the infamous teddy bear picnic, but instead of enjoying sandwiches or munching on fresh cookies, a group of giant, grinning stuffed bears were carving slices of meat from a child, suspended over an open fire. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when the first toddler made an appearance. We rounded a corner and there, sitting in the center of the corridor, was a tiny, adorable baby, one that couldn't have been more than 8 months old. "What the fuck?" I asked, shooting a look at Ed. "I thought the bong and the gas masks were supposed to dispel all the illusions?" "That's not a dweller," Ed said, shaking his head with a grim certainty. "It's a decoy, hard-light mirage." To prove his point, he lifted one hand and flexed his fingers. A few feet away, another identical baby appeared, eerily lifelike. "See? Not real at all," he said matter-of-factly. "If you look closely enough, you'll see that it's slightly transparent, but underneath the hard-light illusion is a doll that'll explode if you try to pick it up. The illusion is specifically designed to mask the bomb from relics that can identify traps. Clever, nasty stuff." He snapped his fingers. The second conjured baby vanished, and so did the decoy. What remained was a creepy, porcelain-faced doll that blazed with a hazy red aura, courtesy of my spelunker's sixth sense. "I lost a good friend to one of these things," Ed said, his eyes distant and haunted. I reached out with a wispy thread of telekinetic power and lifted the doll into the air. As it left the floor, a bright blossom of light filled the corridor, and the ground rumbled from the force of a titanic explosion. Fire rolled toward us, but Ed lifted a hand and summoned a semi-translucent barrier that shielded us from the effects. "Another hard light illusion," Ed explained like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Illusions are kind of the bread and butter around here. Most of the things on this floor use some form of illusion-oriented magic, but the really powerful ones? They can give those illusions actual physical mass, turn thought into reality." He dismissed the shield as the fire died away, then conjured a shadowy dagger from thin air. I picked the relic up off a board member over at one of the bowling alleys. "Cost me 3 toes to snag it, but worth every damn one." He gave the dagger a twirl, its edge catching the dim light. "Turns out, sometimes a good illusion is all you need to keep breathing." He offered me a crazed grin, then let the conjured blade vanish in a puff of light. We made it through the next 3 hallways without issue, and just when I was starting to think that this place maybe wasn't quite as bad as Ed had made it out to be, we found ourselves in another circular hub, much the same as the reception lobby, except this one was covered from floor to ceiling in thick strands of gossamer webbing. 5 additional hallways branched off from the central lobby, and each was likewise covered with more of the silver webbing. I didn't even need my spelunker's sixth sense to tell that we'd just walked right into an ambush. "Oh no, this is bad," Croc muttered, sounding more than a little panicked. "I don't like this at all, Dan. This is a nest. Just like I told you." Almost as though to emphasize just how boned we were, a haunting and unnervingly familiar kid's song filled the air, bleeding from every hallway all at once. It was a lullaby sung by a chorus of different voices, all slightly off tune and in the wrong key. The itsy-bitsy spider, with eyes so cold and black, scurried ever closer, preparing its attack. Down fell the darkness, smothering the light. Out came the terrors that feast in dead of night. They slipped beneath the door and skittered across the floor, tiny eyes gleaming with hunger for what's in store. Silence turned to screams, then whispers soft and warm, leaving naught but empty sheets by the breaking of the morn. "The dog's right," Ed said, as the nursery rhyme began to build to a crescendo. "This is where things get nasty. Woodstock?" He reached up and stroked the bird's feathery head. "You know what to do. Kill it with fire," the bird agreed. She puffed her chest out, opened her beaked maw, and released a stream of fire so bright I could barely stand to look at it. The flames hit the tangle of webbing, and they went up with a violent whoosh like a gas-soaked rag. The creepy lullaby died, replaced by mewling squeals of agony and the vast clacking of legs. Thousands of legs. Tens of thousands, maybe. "We've got company," Ed bellowed, pulling something from his jacket. The weapon gripped in his fist was a matte black Colt 1911, not so different from the one I'd carried during my time in Iraq. Colt M1911A1 service pistol. Rare artifact. Type, firearm, range enhanced. Manufactured in Hartford, Connecticut by the fine folks at Colt, the M1911A1 service sidearm has been solving arguments since March 1911. As the saying goes, God created man, but Samuel Colt made them equal. Although this trusty hunk of steel and lead predates WW1, they haven't really improved on perfection, and it continues to be the service weapon for soldiers, Marines, and lawmen alike. And for damned good reason. The Colt 1911 hits like an angry rodeo bull and is as reliable as the Postal Service. Neither rain, snow, nor sleet will keep it from sending rounds downrange. It's also built to take a serious beating, which means there's a decent chance this weapon will outlast you. Just be careful where you aim. The 1911 doesn't believe in second chances. I jerked my gaze from the pistol and focused instead on the far corridor with dark shapes, punctuated by bright red eyes, poured into the hallway from connecting classrooms. More rappled downward from the mouth like holes dotting the ceiling. Fear formed a tight knot in my stomach as more screeches erupted from my left and my right, from behind and ahead. We were surrounded and these things were coming at us fast. The red triangles on my mini-map were tightening around us like a noose. "Everyone, form a circle," I thundered. "Backs together. Croc, I want you in the center of the ring." I pulled free the super slammer of shielding and pressed it into the dog's paw, which was now disturbingly humanoid. Then I summoned one of my 4 doorway sentinels. Ed shot me a curious glance, but I just shook my head. "I'll explain later," I said before turning back to Croc. "You're our guardian angel, bud," I told the mimic. "Our safety net. Your #1 job is to help whoever needs it, plug the holes before our ship goes under. Understand?" "Of course, Dan," Croc said, nodding its head vigorously. "But what's this for?" the dog asked, holding up the slammer. "That's our insurance policy. Your second job is to make sure we don't get overrun. If things go south and it looks like these little monsters are going to bury us, use the slammer and get your ass through the door. The shield should buy us enough time to regroup, and we'll be right behind you." Croc hesitated for a moment, its goggly eyes regarding me deeply, before it finally nodded. The others moved quickly, pressing into the center of the lobby, our shoulders all touching in a ring. Jacob, Temp, and Drumbo were directly behind me, while Cynthia 2.0 was on my left, revving her chainsaw and clacking her crab arm, and Ed was to my right with his gun leveled and steady. Croc was protected in the center along with the doorway sentinel, perched on top of its spindly crab legs. I prepared an arsenal of spells as the first wave of Sunnyside toddlers emerged from the gloomy hallway directly ahead of me. They were pale, sickly-looking creatures, covered in dark veins that pulsed beneath the surface of their almost translucent skin. Each had the bald head of a baby, but the body of a cat-sized spider with 8 segmented legs. A stinger, easily a foot in length, protruded from the ass end of each nightmare spider. Dweller 0.24718D, Itsy Bitsy Swarmling, Level 18. Question du jour: would you rather fight 100 spider-sized human babies, or one baby-sized, highly venomous spider? Well, great news, now you don't have to choose. That's right, the Itsy Bitsy Swarmlings are the best of both worlds, an unholy amalgamation of arachnid and toddler, all rolled up into one. Plus, there are a lot of them. These cutie patooties are bigger than Goliath bird-eater tarantulas, have the same tangy kick of the wandering hobo spider, and love to travel in swarms. It's a murder trifecta. Individually, the swarmlings aren't too tough, they have the upper body strength of a 3-month-old, after all, but in a coordinated swarm? These little guys are killer. Be prepared to haul ass or burn everything to the ground, because there is no in-between option. Himmel, Arschanzwern, Jacob grumbled from behind me. We should have listened to the dog, this was a terrible idea. A little late for that, I called out, channeling mana into my hammer while I prepared to rain down death and destruction on the baby mimics. Speak for yourself, Temperance said, and I could hear the infectious joy even muffled as it was by the gas mask. This is even better than the cookout. I dare say this might be my favorite level yet. Now have at me, you foul, gore-bellied miscreants. She cackled. Crazy. These people were all fucking crazy. And so was I. Fuck it. Let's get some. I hollered, feeling a strange surge of excitement and adrenaline. Today wasn't the day I died. Nope. Today was the day that we brought down the signal and dealt a death blow to the Hoa. Today was the day I purged the world of a bunch of monstrous nightmares and gained a metric shit ton of levels in the process. Chapter 41. I activated Spike Fault as the front wave of swarmlings scrambled toward us in a wall of giggling legs and smiling, cherubic faces. Spears of earth erupted upward through the oddly spongy surface of the floor, skewering several of the arachnid toddlers and creating a terrain hazard in the process. I swiveled left and right, activating the skill twice more in quick succession, partially blockading 2 more of the connecting hallways and impaling even more toddlers. Even though the swarmlings were relatively high level, they weren't nearly as physically resilient as their grown-up evolutions. The spikes dealt devastating damage, having each impaled toddler's health bar. My arsenal of tools rocketed forward, my oversized, mana-fueled hammer caving in oddly soft heads while my demolition screwdriver gutted arachnoid bellies with ease. Balloon animal spell cards spun into densely populated pockets of toddler bodies and exploded on impact, ripping off multi-segmented legs from the sheer concussive force of the blast. Still, more swarmlings came. They crawled over the corpses of their dead brothers and sisters and scuttled along the walls and ceilings, unperturbed by the horrific casualties they were currently taking. I unleashed Hydroblast with my free hand, zigzagging the beam back and forth in a futile attempt to knock the tots down and keep them from entering into the lobby proper. Each hit with my Hydroblast carved away substantial HP, but it didn't do enough damage to one-shot the tots, and I couldn't afford to leave the beam in place long enough to finish the job. There were just too many of the damned things, and keeping them at bay was the real goal. The hall was served as funnels, choke points, and without them we'd already be overwhelmed and dead. I glanced left and right, realizing I wasn't the only one with that idea. Jacob was using his sofa bazooka to great effect, launching futons and love seats to create obstructions that the spiderlings had a more difficult time maneuvering around. On my right, Ed had conjured some sort of ethereal barricade that resembled a semi-transparent concrete construction barrier. I was pretty sure the barrier was a reinforced, hard-light illusion, just like the baby doll if U-Haul was back. While the swarmling toddlers scuttled over the barrier, the Delver fired his Colt with unwavering precision. Each shot found a head, splattering gore in the cloud and dropping the target on the spot. Fire. Fire. Woodstock caterwauled while circling through the air on outstretched wings before swooping down and spewing thick sheets of flame from her beak. In that moment, she looked less like a common house parrot and more like a miniature, fire-breathing dragon. Burn it down. Burn it all down. She shrieked between fiery breaths. Cynthia didn't have any sort of ranged ability which complicated things. Even with the conjured earthen spikes partially obstructing her hallway, swarmlings were flooding in and spreading out. I couldn't let that stand. Once our defense failed in one area, it would quickly fail in others. I needed to stop the metaphorical bleeding, and I needed to do it now. Shifting minions. I yelled. Drumbo and Cynthia broke ranks, leaving the relative safety of the circle to help plug the gaps with their bodies. Cynthia's chainsaw growled and Drumbo's angle grinder hand attachment screamed as both sheared through limbs or cut the tiny tots down. As the spiders fell, notifications and level up prompts scrolled across my vision, one after another. Although these dwellers only had an eighth the total HP of the Sunny Sitter adults, at level 18 they were a treasure trove of experience points. Realizing they couldn't easily breach our defenses to overwhelm us, the swarmlings switched tactics, vomiting globs of putrid black acid and flinging thick balls of silvery webbing. The balls of webbing exploded on contact, sending out hair-thin strands of gossamer silk that clung to everything and made it incredibly difficult to move. They wrapped around my feet and ankles, miring me to the floor. As for the black acid, I was a little too slow and one of the globs landed on my exposed forearm. The goop burned like flaming napalm and quickly chewed through the top layer of skin and into the muscle and tendons below. My HP dropped by 15 points, but even worse, the damage temporarily cost me the use of my good hand. I cried out in pain as my fingers went numb and my arm dropped uselessly against my side. "Cover me!" I yelled at Ed, slipping free as a greater healing elixir, the #1 bone healing juice in the market. I popped the top with my thumb and chugged the whole damn thing in one long gulp. Although my HP spell cards were faster and more efficient, they were also weaker and more limited. Yeah, they restored HP and mended relatively minor injuries on the spot, but a greater healing elixir like this could literally regrow a lung or reattach a lost limb. The acid burning its way through my arm fizzled and died as the power of Zima went to work and my skin and muscle knit itself back together. "You fuckers like playing with acid, huh?" I growled while tossing the elixir bottle away. Well, time for a little chemistry lesson. Pissed as hell, I activated Stainslayer Maelstrom and watched as great blue droplets of super bleach burned through a gaggle of spiderlings attempting to bypass the jutting stone spikes. The spell was brutally effective and killed anything already injured, while badly crippling the healthy tots. With a thought, I sent my oversized hammer whirling forward and brought it down like a giant shoe on a trapped spiderling, who was futilely attempting to wriggle between a gap in the spikes. As the tool's blunt head crashed down like the wrath of God, I triggered one of the hammer's special abilities, Gavel of Get Fucked. The swarmling was both literally and figuratively on its last legs, its health bar already deep in the red, so I was in no way surprised when Killing Blow procced on impact, an execute ability that instantly ended any creature below 10% total health. The spiderling exploded into a cloud of black mist as Wave of Justice rippled outward, triggering Gavel of Get Fucked once again on any enemy within a 20-foot radius. Best I could figure, there were at least 50 swarmlings inside the AO. Not even I was ready for the ensuing carnage. It was like watching compound interest work in real time. Although most of the swarmlings were above 10% total health, Gavel of Get Fucked still dealt damage equal to 20% of their existing health pool, which was substantial. Thing was, there were also a bunch of swarmlings who were already below 10% total health and knocking on death's door. That triggered another round of Killing Blow, which in turn set off another Wave of Justice, which affected all enemies in a 20-foot radius. I'd used this ability plenty of times before, but I'd never seen anything like this. It was a perfect storm of pure slaughter. Because there were so many of the damned swarmlings all crammed into such a small space, and because they were rather fragile and had relatively low health pools, the spell basically created one enormous feedback loop. The ability's primary effect would whittle down the strong, Killing Blow would cull the weak, and that, in turn, would start the process all over again. Washington rinse. Repeat. Swarmlings popped like water balloons and tiny bodies rained down from the floors and ceilings, accumulating in corpse piles as high as my knee while a string of notifications flooded my vision. In less than a handful of minutes, I'd gone up a total of 7 levels and earned 2 new research achievements, complete with a pair of new titles and extra loot tokens. Level up. X7 Research Achievement unlocked. Domino Rally. Well, if it isn't the King of Cause and Effect. By using the backroom's equivalent of a domino rally, you basically set off an IED inside a propane factory, conveniently located on top of a methane deposit, which was coincidentally next to a nursery for at-risk youth. You killed more than 40 enemy combatants with only a single blow, and the gory results speak for themselves. Somewhere, Rube Goldberg is applauding from his grave. Reward: 3x Copper Delver loot tokens, 1x Silver Gambler loot token, 1x Gold Trapsmith loot token. Title: Domino Rally. Increase the chance of triggering all secondary and tertiary relic and artifact effects by 10%. Research achievement unlocked. Toddler Terminator. Do you feel proud of yourself? Huh? Do ya? I bet punching your way out of a toddler swarm makes you feel like a big strong man, doesn't it? I mean, sure, they weren't exactly harmless in the most technical sense of the word, but let's not pretend this is anything other than what it was, a goddamn baby massacre. First the cold-blooded murderer title, now this? For shame. If mimic parents had even a rudimentary emotional connection to their disgusting offspring, they'd be really upset right now. For the record, they don't, but it's the principle of the thing. Reward, 3,200 experience points, 1x Ruby Slayer loot token. Title, Toddler Terminator, deal 10% additional damage to all opponents who are designated by the adolescent or juvenile descriptor. I read through both achievements feeling a conflicting mixture of emotions. Toddler Terminator was a monstrous achievement for obvious reasons, but Domino Rally had to be one of the best titles I'd ever received. It was certainly a hell of a lot better than my Human Cannon title, which was just slightly better than dogshit. The extra loot tokens were a huge win as well, especially the Ruby Slayer token. The last time I'd earned a Ruby loot token, I'd been rewarded with the gavel of Get Fucked Sigil Stone, which had just murdered all those baby spiders. The others finished slaughtering the handful of tots who survived the deadly purge cycle, and by the time I was done reading through the notifications an eerie silence had settled over the hallway, broken only by the sound of our labored breathing. Okay, what kind of government Black Ops secret weapon testing bullshit was that? Ed asked, looking at me incredulously. He wasn't alone. Everyone was staring at me as if I'd just sprouted a dick on my forehead. Truly, that was surely the most remarkable display of slaughter and savagery that I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing, Temperance said, a note of reverence in her voice. Jacob, on the other hand, looked disturbed by the bloodshed, not that it was hard to figure out why. These things may not have been human in the strictest sense of the word, but he still didn't like needless violence and death, and Temp was right, this was violence on a level one hadn't seen before. I recalled my hammer and held it up with a weak smile. Just happened to have the right tool for the right job, I said. Ed grunted, seeming to accept my answer for the time being. Well, don't go patting yourself on the back just yet. You think all this death doesn't send up a flare? Hell, it's like ringing the damn dinner bell for whatever else might be lurking out there. Mark my words, more of these things will come crawling out of the woodwork. Let them come, Temp said, her eyes huge and wild. We will butcher them just as easily as we butchered this last lot. It won't just be the swarmlings, Ed warned. They'll come, sure, but so will Mr. Wiggles. The thousand-legged eldritch worm. Croc asked. One and the same, Ed confirmed, his gaze darting around, sharp and suspicious, as if the walls might be listening. And Mr. Wiggles isn't like the rest of the Sunny Sitters. Not really. It's more like a janitor, white no. Or some twisted, oversized organic Roamba. Its job is to clean up the messes, corpses, guts, anything that used to be alive. He glanced down at the battered old watch on his wrist. Anyway, basement stairwell's not far. We've got a bit of time, but don't count on it staying that way. If you want to loot these corpses, you better move quick like. Good, I replied, because there's no way in hell I'm leaving all these relics behind. Not again. Although racking up experience points was the real goal, there had to be close to 300 relics here for the taking, assuming we could get to every corpse. That was highly unlikely, but anything was better than nothing, and I didn't think my heart could handle the prospect of leaving behind an untapped treasure trove of valuable loot. You did the heavy lifting here, Ed said, glancing around at the towering piles of bodies, so I'll keep watch while you work. I didn't need to be told twice, and neither did the others. We all knew what was at stake. I rushed over to the nearest swarmling, dropped to one knee, and quickly accessed its spatial core. Unlike the adult Sunny Sitters, these things didn't have the spurified amplifier relics, which made sense given what Ed had told us about the process. Neither the toddlers nor the older kids who roamed the streets and cornfields were enthralled by the radio signal, which meant they probably gained the amplifier once they evolved into their final, adult form. Dwellers, like Croc, couldn't add relics to their spatial cores in the same way that we delvers could. Instead, they organically grew new relics as they got stronger over time. Most of the toddlers had 2 relics apiece, though there were several different combinations. Stick and Cling was a common, stamina-based relic that looked like a half-used tube of superglue. As the name implied, it allowed the user to stick to walls or ceilings like a Valor-brand Spider-Man for as long as they had stamina to burn. String Snare launched a compressed ball of webbing that exploded on impact, entangling anything in a 5-foot radius in thick strands of spider silk. A perfect crowd control ability. There were 2 variations of a relic called Venomous Payload. The first, and more frequent drop, was an uncommon stamina-based ability that added a nasty venom debuff to any slashing or piercing attacks when activated. It reminded me of Temp's Smallpox Blanket, though both the damage and duration were significantly better. The upgraded rare-grade version, called Venomous Payload Bolt, was a mana-based ability, which let the user launch a concentrated orb of corrosive swarmling venom that ate through damn near anything. It was the same spell that had decimated my hand, so I knew exactly how effective it could be. Although I already had Stenslayer Maelstrom, I planned on hanging on to Venomous Payload Bolt all the same. Unlike Maelstrom, it dealt single-target burst damage and wasn't strictly limited to organic materials. It could also chew through cloth, plastic, and metal. I also stumbled across a single rare-grade passive that had real potential, assuming I could figure out a good way to exploit it. Swarm Tactics. Rare Relic, Level 1. Range, 50 meters. Cost, 35 mana. Duration, 10 minutes. You've finally discovered the ancient art of victory through volume. Used by emperors, warlords, and dictators since the dawn of time, this is battle superiority through overwhelming numerical advantage. After all, why fight mono-e-mono when you can instead fight mono-e? Oh my god, why are there so many of them? When more than 2 summoned creatures are within 50 meters of one another, each gains a 5% boost to athleticism, toughness, health regeneration, and rage. For each additional creature summoned, the swarm gains an additional 2% bonus and 1 stack of rage. The more creatures you summon, the stronger the collective gets, until they're a nightmarish wave of fangs, claws, and unbridled violence. Just be warned, if the swarm becomes too enraged, they will turn on anyone or anything that gets in their way, including you or your allies. This relic enables mana usage. We looted almost half the swarmlings when we heard something enormous trundling toward us from a nearby connecting corridor. Scraping along the floors and issuing guttural moans that reverberated off the ceilings. "Wrap it up," Ed barked, his voice sharp and jittery. "We've got something headed our way, and it's big from the sounds of it. We need to be gone before it shows. Trust me on this." I finished pilfering a nearby swarmling, snatching up yet another venomous payload and a stick and cling, before standing and wiping my hands free on my bathrobe. I used a bit of hand sanitizer for good measure, though it felt like a losing battle. Spider gore decorated my shirt and shorts, and more goop liberally stained my hands and arms a dark grayish color. I had so much blood on me that I'd inadvertently activated my bloodbath title, temporarily increasing my health regen rate by 5% for the next 8 hours. The boost wasn't worth it. Worse than the mess, however, was the smell. Not because it was awful, but because it wasn't. Instead of reeking like rotten fish or old cheese, the dead toddlers smelled like freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. Staring around at piles of butchered arachnoid creatures while silently craving a glass of cold milk was somehow grosser. It didn't help that Croc was devouring the looted bodies like Santa working through a plate of Christmas cookies. Unlike the infected adults, it seemed these little monsters were uninfected and thus, fair game. "Finally, that pile of corpses you promised," the mimic said between great slurping gulps. "Does anyone want to try a bit?" Croc asked. "There's plenty to go around, more than I could possibly eat in one sitting." "That is very kind of you, but no," Jacob replied, looking like he was repressing the urge to vomit everywhere. "Your loss," Croc said with a shrug. "The meat is fabulously tender and has a great mouthfeel, Plus there's just a hint of cinnamon which is unexpected but pleasant. I just grimaced and tried to ignore the crunch of bones and the wet slurp of meat slipping down the mimic's gullet. Tobe continued,